Well, this is Walking Through Mark, episode number 31, and the location in the book of Mark for our continued reading is chapter 14, Mark chapter 14, verse 53. Mark 14, verse 53. We're right near the end, as you probably can tell if you're open, that is, in your Bible. You can see we're almost through. Chapter 16 is a short chapter, and before that, of course, one more chapter, which we probably will not start today, but we'll be probably there, ready to start next time. And so we are near the end. Speaking of near the end, we're near the end of the earthly life, prior to the cross, that is. We all know about his resurrection, of course, but near the end of his earthly life prior to the cross of Jesus. 6 hours, let's say. And I'm making that up a little bit, but I'm not far off. What we would call 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. The rooster has not crowed yet. That's why I'm fairly certain in saying it that way. And he'll be placed on the cross, 9 o'clock, thereabouts, in our way of time, keeping time. And so we're just a few hours. A lot will transpire, and we'll be reading some of it, at least, the part that Mark records, and making some brief comments as we go along. All right, enough said to set it up. Let's go. This is Mark chapter 14, verse 53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witnesses against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I'll destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another, made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But he kept silent, meaning Jesus. He kept silent and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him, saying to him, Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, What further need do we have of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. What do you think? And they all condemned him to be deserving of death. Then some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to beat him, and to say to him, Prophesy! And the officers struck him with the palms of their hands. Okay, we'll stop there. Of course, the story continues, but we'll stop there so we don't have too much of a big chunk to comment on. Let's go back and look through a few things. By the way, speaking of just a few things, Mark is the most condensed or concise of the gospel records. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all four. Mark is the shortest. Brevity, brief statements made, what he's left out, what he's included, that kind of thing. And so and if you are, and I hope you are, very interested in the complete picture of what transpired around the cross, I would encourage, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I'm, for now, just walking through Mark. And so allow for that if you think, well, there were some other things transpired. You're correct, but we're going with what Mark has said. One of the things that struck me as I began to read was, it says all the chief priests, does it not? It says we're assembled, yes, all the chief priests, the elders, and scribes. One of my first thoughts is, what are all these guys doing up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Maybe I'm the only one with a bit of a crazy thought like that, but I can understand somebody has insomnia and can't sleep, or there's a handful of guys that are the ringleaders of the enemies of Jesus. All of them? All of the councilmen and the chief priests, elders, and scribes? It's amazing. Serious. This probably, quite possibly says just how much anger they had against Jesus, that all of them are up until 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get this done. They knew about the betrayal, I imagine. I know some did, but I'm just saying maybe they all knew. Word got around, hey, we got him, or hey, we're going to get him, and so forth. So it does say how much anger they had. It wasn't just a couple politicians that got a little bit bent out of shape about some things. All of them did, and they're all present here. I say all of them. I need to stop myself right there. We'll find out later a couple aren't all as all on board as all of them generally are, but that's for later. Okay, Peter, first of all, let me just say that where we started reading was them coming back into Jerusalem from the Garden of Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives, and that was in the previous installment of this series. And so they go back into the city. They go there to their place, you'd say. It's called, how do they call it? Doesn't actually say where, but anyway, to the courtyard of the high priest. There you go. And so here we find Peter regathering, collecting himself, because all the apostles had fled. I mean, Judas is involved in the betrayal, but the other 11, they're gone. I'd say they ran for the woods, if there were any woods. They ran for the tall grass, whatever your figure of speech is, and they got out of there. Well, anyway, Peter's recovered and he's in the courtyard. I mean, he's close. And it's probably a gated kind of courtyard is my guess. In fact, I don't think I have to guess about that. I think he had to be permitted to come through the gate and enter in. So he's in the closed-in courtyard, open to the sky, but still closed in from the street, and he can even see Jesus. He's in the building, maybe. I would assume in the building or on a patio or somewhere like that, but not in the courtyard where he is, but close enough that he can see Jesus. And then we're told by Mark some of what transpired for the next hour or two, and that was trying to get Jesus to incriminate himself. And but they have a hard time. He won't incriminate himself. Jesus, like a sheep led to the slaughter, doesn't open his mouth, doesn't bleat as a sheep. Well, that's also said of Jesus, like a sheep led to the slaughter, not opening his mouth. So that'll be true of Jesus. That's not absolute. That doesn't mean he never said one thing, never said a word, never uttered a peep. No, well, we have recorded here a word or two that he said, but as a general picture of how he reacted, nothing. Wouldn't say anything. So they have to resort then to their own efforts to try to pin something on him, but they have a problem. They can't get folks to agree. They need two, at least if they're going to try to be legal. They need two people to agree in what they saw. That was the law, two or more witnesses, and they can't get two. And then some just start making it up. They just start lying, and they're just having a real struggle. Finally, the high priest has had enough, I guess, and he just throws it at Jesus. Are you the Son of God or not? Or how does he word it exactly? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? See, and here Jesus does respond, I am. And he even adds a little bit more. He says, and the Son of Man you'll soon see sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Oh, high priest tearing his clothes. Somebody told me that was not permitted. But he's just had who needs witnesses when you hear the man incriminate himself before our very ears. And so he's got to die. Well, I'm getting a little ahead now. They still have a step or two to go through to get him on the cross. Their job as Jews is not to crucify people. That's not their place. And what do you do in the meantime? Just beat up on Jesus. And I mean that literally. They slap him around, they beat him up and make fun of him and mock him. Okay, got a few more minutes here. Let's go ahead and finish the chapter then. This is 66, verse 66, and go through the end of chapter 14. Now, as Peter was below in the courtyard, okay, so it must have been an elevated room or patio or something. As Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, You also were with Jesus of Nazareth? And he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you're saying. And he went out on the porch, and a rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him again and began to say to those who stood by, This is one of them. But he denied it again. And a little later, those who stood by said to Peter again, Surely you are one of them, for you're a Galilean, and your speech shows it. Then he began to curse and swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. A second time the rooster crowed. Then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him, quote, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And when he thought about it, he wept. We've discussed this because it had been prophesied, it had been stated as fact, not a prediction, not a guess, not a foretelling, humanly speaking, of a future event, but a statement of fact, and I mean detailed. The rooster twice crowing, before that happens, you will have denied 3 times. Involved in the denial, which may be spaced minutes, not hours, but minutes apart, meaning they're not all right behind the other. It just basically repeated immediately, but rather spaced a little bit. And a rooster crowing. Oop, that's one. Well, I sure hope he doesn't crow again soon, because that would then make the the prophecy wrong, because he said before twice. You know, it's amazing how Jesus knew exactly. The rooster will crow. You'll be in the process of denying. There will be 3 times that you do it before the rooster crows a second time. And it is just simply amazing. But anyway, now, this is what, of course, did exactly take place. Peter probably, I'm guessing here, of course, trying to get into his head, probably is not even thinking of what I'm doing right now. I can't believe I'm doing, because Jesus just said a few hours ago that I would do that, and I said no, I wouldn't. Maybe he is. Each time he denies, maybe he's thinking, what am I doing? But I would not be surprised if it did not until the 3rd time, and the rooster crowing twice. Let me just read it again. The second time the rooster crowed, this is verse 72, then Peter called to mind the word that Jesus had said to him. It's amazing how blind we can be, how forgetful we can be. And I mean just hours prior to having said to the contrary. Nope, not going to happen. You want to think that, well, just stubbornly refuse, just so you make sure Jesus is not correct about that. Good luck with that. And I'm a little flippant when I say that. No one's going to be able to stand against God. But anyway, my point is he does exactly as Jesus has said. One more point and we'll stop. 2 points, actually. One, notice how he resorts to cursing and swearing. Is that verse, forget where that is, verse 71? Some people might think that he just resorted to using a bunch of foul language, expletives, a lot of cuss words, and so forth. I guess there's a possibility for that. My thought is that he resorted to taking oaths. And a part of that oath, or a swearing, bringing down upon himself or family or whomever a curse of God if I'm lying. And now he may have resorted to just a bunch of vulgarities, but my thought is that he knew that just denying something wasn't going to seemingly get it to stop the accusations, and he was afraid, of course, being drawn into it. Maybe they'd arrest him too. Maybe that's his fear. And so he resorts to, and I'll just make this up, I swear to God, may I be condemned to an eternal hell if I'm lying, and I'm making that up off the top of my head. And the last thing, he wept when it finally hit him. He wept bitterly. I think one of the other gospel writers calls it bitterly. He didn't just get a little choked up with a little tear toward it. He wept bitterly about it when it the emotion of what hit him when the rooster crowed twice. He remembered that Jesus had just said hours before that it would happen, and he vehemently saying, no way is that going to happen, and it did. It did. I won't get into more because I said I'd make that the last point, but that is so sad to see Peter weeping bitterly as we conclude the chapter. Okay, thank you very much.